Well, Shabbat Shalom to all our family and friends. It's a wonderful, beautiful, windy, cold Sabbath. Sabbath is always beautiful because of the holiness, the blessedness, and the rest that we encounter. So it's always, that's why you'll hear me say it's another beautiful Sabbath. But that's what I'm meaning. I'm not necessarily referring to the experience we're having in the weather.
The environmental issues are one thing. The internal issues are totally another.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So this is Torah Talks with Tony and Bill. I'm Tony. This is Bill. I call him Papa B. We're excited about a lot of things. One of the things is that the parsha we're about to study today. We invite you to come out. We always have a beautiful time in the Word, so come out and join us there. I'll give you a little bit more information right here at the end as to how you might do that. I also want to thank those of you who follow us on the Facebook page and listen in and give feedback. We love feedback. We love to hear from you and what you're thinking. We're always wanting to grow in this. Want to thank guys like Robbie Harvey for asking us about the YouTube, and we are looking at YouTube. We are in the process of trying to put some of the videos out there. So thank you, Robbie, for giving us that feedback. We also welcome feedback from you. If you have questions or things of that nature, if you have comments, place them on the page. You can even do that during the live post. So we're always looking to grow and to develop, which brings us to, I guess this is a segue into this particular lesson. I'm going to go back to Parsha Bo. Well, before I do that, I want to go back to between the Parshas, all right, because there's some information that I was able to record during our Parsha studies, and it was between Shemot and Vayera. I wanted to talk to you about how circumcision takes place between those two experiences or between those two parshas. Here are a few things that I was able to write and take notes on when we were in our when we was in Parsha Shemot. We learned who we are. That was one of the things that stood out to me is who are we, right? And some of the things that we learned about that is in learning who we are, we also learned and revisited the importance of Sabbath. I love to hear Papa B talk about Sabbath because I think there's such deep hidden truths in the whole Sabbath experience, and I think we can sometimes minimize that experience to the particular day, or we can minimize it to a particular religious teaching or doctrine around Sabbath, and we kind of get away from what Sabbath is about and why it's so important to us. We sometimes we can disconnect Sabbath from our own identities, and I think that's an error to do that. You don't want to disconnect Sabbath from your identity. It's a part of who we are, and that's some of the things that came out of it.
If I might just address that with you for a second and talk about it. Yeah, I do love to talk about the Sabbath because if you've ever had a garment, a piece of clothing that you wore that was maybe knit, and there was that one thread that if you pulled that thread out, the entire garment would unravel. That's Sabbath for us. Sabbath is the thread that holds everything together. It doesn't stand by itself. It holds all of the Torah, all of the teachings of Yeshua, all the teachings of his apostles and disciples. Yes. Every revelation, all the revelation streams come together in this Sabbath. And it doesn't look like any other thread. It doesn't look like that important to any of us. But then if you start yanking at it, if you start pulling it out, if you start taking it out of your life, if you start taking it out of your consciousness, if you start changing the way you approach your week, I mean, the week is built around the Sabbath. We understand. Yes. Unfortunately, in America and in Western culture, it has ceased to be so. And we have paid the price for that. The Sabbath is the center point of everything. That's why it's the first of the Moedim mentioned in Leviticus 23, the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath and keep its holiness. Maintain its essential holiness. Because this is the first fruits of holiness. First thing God ever said was holy was the Sabbath. So if we understand that the first fruits of Sabbath is critical, if we lose the first fruits, we'll lose the entire crop. We'll lose the entire harvest. The first fruits of the holiness, to understand holiness, to ever be able to walk in holiness, to be able to talk about holiness, to be able to live in lives that reflect the glory of the King, must have this first fruits of holiness in it. It's the silver thread that you don't yank, you don't pull out, and you don't pretend you can have this garment on without wearing that cloth with that thread.
The first fruits of holiness. Anytime Papa B and I talk, I'm listening, and there's usually something that just grabbed my attention, right? First fruits of holiness just did that. Sabbath being that, which leads me back to one of the things that we talked about was that through Sabbath, the energy and life flow of His blessedness, His holiness, and the rest that He wants us to enter into, all this happens through Sabbath, through the Sabbath experience. Another thing that we talked about that I thought was profound was that when we start talking about Sabbath, especially to those of us who've come out of these different systems, and those systems in itself with the doctrines that are there and presented to us on a weekly basis, sometimes those systems create issues for us in really understanding and embracing Sabbath. And when you said this in our Shemot meeting, it brought me to myself, because I understood the process I had to go through before I would even look at Sabbath that way. And this is what you said in the lesson. It takes a season of growth and awakening and of learning to be able to choose this beautiful experience, right? So we know we hear it first, right? And Abba begins to communicate with us concerning Sabbath and reach out to us and touch our hearts. But it takes a season of growth. I love that, because that's my experience in almost everything that I remember. I had a ministry, and we used to meet at they used to call it ICW back then. And every week I would go to the whiteboard and prepare my notes for everybody, right? And I usually pray, and then I'll go and I'll prepare my notes. And so I had my notes, and I was going to the whiteboard, and I started to write. Abba said to me, erase it. I was like, now, if you understand, from the culture we come from, we've done a lot of studying, we've done a lot of meditating, research. So what I'm about to put on the board, I'm very confident that this is the Lord's will. He wants to speak this to the people. So when He says to erase that, and I thought, okay, He's going to give me something fresh. So I erased it. And then the next sentence was, forget what you know. I was like, oh, this is difficult. Now I don't know how to prepare for the people. It's like in one moment that's taken away, and I no longer have the confidence even to speak to the people that day anyway. And then He said, humble yourself. Well, my idea of humility in that sense, in that context, was to get on my knees and bow before the Lord, right? And that's right, So I get on my knees and I bow before Him, and He says, get lower. So at this point, I'm thinking of, because another part of my teaching is to prostrate myself. So I'm going to do that. So I lay out, right? And I put my face on the concrete floor, and I'm just laying there, and a soft whisper says, get lower. And I'm thinking, I can't get any lower than this. Exactly, right? Because this is not necessarily, what I'm saying to you is not necessarily going to take place in some physical activity, right? That usually the physical activity, or it should be, an indication of something deeper going on in here. But at that point, it was something going on in here, right? I'm trying to translate what He's saying in the way I know how. To me, that's what has happened in the Sabbath teaching and in the instructions. We we're hearing the Sabbath teaching and we're responding from here, and we're doing our best to translate what he's saying, but we're using our minds to do so.
And instantly, and I think we're pretty much conditioned, first of all, by life in America, life in the world. Well, it could not have to be in America. You could be in South Africa. You could be in England, which we have people that listen all the time. But you could be in any of these locations. But the culture that we have kind of makes us draw into our intellects. I call it our pseudo intellect, but nevertheless, that which we think is intellect, and we tend to work through as if it were our brains and our intelligence. So we're conditioned that way. Then we get into forms of religion that we're used to, that we grew up with perhaps, or that we stepped into at some stage in our life. We reverted to a form, and in that form, again, it draws you into intellect. It draws you into thinking things, and therefore you build a framework. It's like you're building a treehouse in your backyard. You start and you keep building, and maybe just throwing stuff together, which a lot of it is just thrown together. Right. But you build this treehouse in your backyard. Well, the problem is that life is not lived out of a treehouse. Life is lived in a situation of saying, I need to be awake and alert with my eyes open to see the beauty and the majesty and the glory of what God has provided for us today. And so that we have to get out of our intellect, or as I call it, our pseudo, fake intellect, self-important intellect. And that's why he was trying to tell you to get low. Yes. Get lower, get lower, get lower. It's not just a matter of how physically low you are on the ground, how much your face is pressed against the floor or the carpet. That's not the ultimate issue. Beyond that, there's a level at which we say, I need to get away from thinking I know stuff, and that I can tell people stuff, that I can possibly prepare for the people. You can't prepare for the people. You can prepare for the Lord. Mm-hmm. And to prepare for the Lord and for what he wants to do is to get out of your pseudo-intellect, get out of your thinking, your treehouse of information and knowledge. And so I think that's where the Sabbath is in Hebrew thought and in the Jewish people's thought, and they don't do everything right. I mean, but in the Hebrew thought is Sabbath and Shalom are, and you can't separate them. They're inseparable. And if you think of Sabbath, you think of Shalom. And if you think of Shalom, you think of Sabbath. Now, the idea of having to get your head out of your treehouse to be able to deal with Sabbath is the same thing it is with regard to Shalom, peace. Yeshua said to us, to his disciples, after some time of walking with them, as he was preparing to leave them and release the Ruach, the Spirit, the Holy Spirit to them in the upper room, he says to them, my Shalom, my peace, I give you. Well, the problem is that treehouse intellect, pseudo-intellect, doesn't handle peace very well. It handles judgment really well, criticism really well, attitudes, complaints, accusations, offense. It handles that really well. But Shalom doesn't handle that at all. It's like a duck's back, water off the duck's back, as they say. Those offenses and angers and accusations and criticisms, they just go off your back. They don't come out of your mouth, because that's what Shalom is. So there's a process of embracing Shalom that requires the gradual release of the pseudo-intellect or the treehouse intellect or the I think I'm smart. And as well as it is with the Sabbath. The Sabbath is the same thing. The Sabbath, Yeshua said that God made the Sabbath for man. And some people say, well, then I guess it's okay. Well, God made peace for you too. Right. So I don't need to do peace anymore because God gave it to me. It's for man. Well, that's ridiculous. Do you realize how silly it sounds? Right. No, it's a gift we have to unwrap and then begin to appropriate and then begin to use. As it was with the peace, with the peace of God, the peace that passes understanding, so it is with the Sabbath. We have to take it, unwrap it, learn to embrace it, put it on, and let it be the silver thread that runs through everything in our lives.
I love that, the silver thread that runs through everything in our lives. So one of the things that we as we start the road toward this next area of operation for circumcision to take place, which is the heart. As a matter of fact, if you've been following us, you know we're now at the heart. In Parsha Bo, go, he says, time to go to Pharaoh, right? It's time, Moshe, it's time to go to Pharaoh. The courtship begins is how we started our Parsha studies. When this is a time where heaven invades earth on the behalf of the people of God. So one of the things that I noted from the last Parsha was learn from Pharaoh. All right, we're going to go to Pharaoh now. Learn from Pharaoh, and here's one of the things that I wrote that we need to learn: avoid the tendency to value your heart. This is something that you spoke to us about, to value your heart above Abba's plan, right? When I think of all the different times, and I want you to listen, when I think of all the different times someone has said to me, just follow your heart. Oh my goodness. And when I think of the times where I actually try to do that, the consequences of that, the frustrations that came with that. I'm talking to people right now. People are calling me counseling, wanting counsel because they followed their hearts. They thought they were doing the right thing. So Shaul says, I beseech you, brothers, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is a reasonable service. And he says, and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. When I think of the times I've followed or tried to follow my heart without the renewing of the mind taking place in that whole process, the issues that I got myself into, the things that I ended up into, the dead-end roads that I ended up on, was a lesson to me. It was a lesson to say, maybe that's not what leads you to the wisdom and the desire and the pleasure of the Lord. Your heart need to be circumcised. And in a minute, I hope that you'll point out a couple of these passages of scripture. There was about 4 passages that probably laid out in this outline concerning the heart. 2 of them stuck out to me, Jeremiah 4 and then Ezekiel 44, I believe it was. But what we learn in Parsha Bo is that we have to surrender our hearts to this act of circumcision so that our hearts may be strengthened to bring forth this beauty and glory. So if your heart, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, right? And we learned something about that. We learned a whole different way of looking at that in terms of how God strengthened Pharaoh's heart to do what was in his heart. Where a man treasures are, so is his heart, right? And so we learned that the Lord strengthened. The Lord loves us, and he loves the way we operate, the way we function. He created all of that. But it works best in harmony with him. It works best when it's aligned with his good pleasure. So what I want Papa B to talk about as we prepare to move into this, because I want you to hear this matter of the heart. There's something he states about surrendering the heart in this outline that I'm going to close this section with. But I want you to hear more about this surrendering of the heart and why it's so important to have your heart circumcised versus just allowing someone, and maybe with good intentions, to say to you, hey, sweetie, just follow your heart.
I think it helps us to realize what the heart is. I mean, to say circumcise your heart, or let God circumcise your heart, or God promises he will circumcise our hearts. Those are, of course, English renditions that we read, and they mean something to us. We feel something when we talk about the word heart, and immediately you sense there's something internal. We don't necessarily tie it to the organ that pumps blood, although that's That's obviously from the scientist's viewpoint or from the medical field's viewpoint. They think of that being the heart. But we tend to think and understand that heart is bigger than just that organ. The heart is the internal essence of who we are. It's the sense. And now in Hebrew, the Hebrew word that we translate into English as heart in the biblical story is lev. Lamed, the L sound, and then bet, or it makes a V sound when you put it at the end of the word in this context without the dagesh in it, but the long lev, okay? If you added L to it, level, you'd hear the English word level, lev, but it's a little bit harder, lev. The lev is an interesting thing because what lev means is the cake batter. Or the soup bowl. It's what goes in to the substance, the vessel. What goes into the vessel and how it works out. The perfect reference. It's kind of a tough story, but in Chronicles it talks about the Adonijah and Tamar and the wife, the sister, and his desire, and he pretended to be sick so she would come take care of him, and then she would stir up the dough and make cakes for him because she was his sister and she was trying to take good care of him. He had a surreptitious bad motive because you see, as she would take the ingredients and put the ingredients in the vessel and stir them up, she would move. There was movement that took place. It was enticing to him in some ways. It's a sad story, difficult story to even understand, but this is the essence of the lev, the heart. It's what ingredients you put in. If you take the lamed, which is sort of a pictograph or a hieroglyph of an ox goad or a cattle prod or the human tongue, what is going into the vessel? What is being directed? How much direction? So if we understand the heart is where we process stimuli from outside. It's not the computer of the brain. It is the way we emotionally and from a standpoint of will process the inputs that we receive from the world. That's why the heart's deceptive. The heart isn't by its nature deceptive. It's by its input deceptive. The problem that we have is that we have serpentine input. You know, did God truly say, surely you will not die? And all the serpentine information. Then we have the fallen human information. We have the Nimrodian information. The sense we can build this, we can do this, we do it our way. We have the Babel, the Tower of Babel mindset. Well, we'll make a name for ourselves, and we'll do this, and we'll build a city and a tower that extends up to God, and we can basically control him instead of him controlling us. We can tell him what to do, and when we speak our thing, we'll call it prayer. And what it really is witchcraft. We're going to tell him what to do. And so this is the different inputs that can come into your vessel. And so now when we say circumcise the heart, it says, no, we're going to cut out that extra sensitive spot, that extra sensitive flesh that likes to hear all that other stuff, the serpentine messages, the human input messages. Oh, we haven't gone too far yet. We just got to Babel. We got so many more of these human messages that try to come in and pollute your heart. So the idea of having God to circumcise our heart, to cut away the excess flesh, the excess sensitivity, the excess susceptibility, the excess sentimentality, which will get you, the excess sensuality of just liking the way it feels, and liking the way something sounds, liking the way the idea hits you. This is the issue of having the circumcision, the cutting. The Holy One acts as the mohel, or the cutter, the trimmer, who comes in and says, okay, I need to take away your ability, your desire at least, to hear certain kinds of input in your vessel, to take into you the serpentine message. Cut away the part of you that listens to that. It's kind of like our tongue has taste buds. Yeah. different taste buds on different parts of the tongue. This is just the way the anatomy of the human being works. If you damage part of the tongue, you'll take away one part of their taste, not all their taste. You'll take away, maybe they won't taste the sweet, or maybe they won't taste the sour or the bitter or whatever the case may be. And the Holy One says, that's what I'm doing with your heart, with your input, with your cake batter. I'm taking away from you the ability to receive in you. If you will let me, to the extent you will let me, to take away the ability to receive and respond to those serpentine messages, to respond to those directives of the human flesh that want to be God for themselves and tell God what to do and just be their own person, do their own will. You know, the part that you kind of skim through quickly, you didn't skip it, but you didn't say it quickly, or you did say it quickly in Romans 12 when you quoted that, was, which is your reasonable service. This, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God. No serpentine inputs, no human Babylonian mindset inputs, no we're going to build a tower and make a name for ourselves inputs. Present yourselves a holy and acceptable to God, which is just your reasonable service. Avodah, this is what you were made to do. This is how you were made to exist, to surrender your heart to the cutting away of the sensitive areas which receive and listen to and are tickled by those serpentine, humanistic, pseudo-intellectual messages which pollute the heart and turn it in all sorts of different strange directions.
Oh, wow. Remember that where we're going with this is, according to the prophetic word, is that from these circumcised people will emerge. I always quote you on, there is a time coming and a people arising. The people of God will emerge. The kingdom culture will emerge from this. And so we've had glimpses of the kingdom culture. But under circumcision, there would be an even greater display and message that comes forth from the kingdom. The people of God are actually surrendering their hearts, and you have a message here about heart, not my will, but yours be done. And that is the message of the kingdom. That is the message of a circumcised people, not my will, but yours be done. And that's what will emerge, and that's what we'll hear more. Not just hear it. I think we've heard a lot of things. Not just hear it, but this is where we will actually see a people living this way, demonstrating life on the stage of humanity as this is the way we relate and we walk with our Father, is that we walk according to his will. The song we sing sometimes in worship, what you say, I'll say. What you pray, I'll pray. You know, what we're saying is, I'm going to pay closer attention to Abba, and I'm going to begin to respond to him, and as opposed to reacting to the things around me. Circumcision gives us that, right? I'll read this in our closing. We're about close. I want to let Papa B close on this. In Jeremiah chapter 4. In verse 4, it says, the people of Yehuda, the people of Judah, and inhabitants of Jerusalem, circumcise yourselves for Adonai. Remove the foreskins of your heart. And he says, otherwise, my fury will lash out like fire, burning so hot that no one can quench it because of how evil your actions are. Can you close us today on that?
Yeah. First of all, look at who it's directed to. The idea is, the closer we presume to get or seek to get to the Holy One, and the more we are identified with his kingdom and his people, whether we self-identify or whether the world out there identifies us, but more particularly to the extent we are in the mindset of Jerusalem, which is Jerusalem, as we would say it in the English Western culture mindset. Jerusalem is the city. The whole idea is, as we get closer to that and representing the kingdom of heaven coming to earth, it is essential that we weed out the influences of the foreign nations around us, that we weed out the influences of our own fleshly culture and ethnicity and all the stories that go with it, all the background, the history, the offenses, the wounds of our past, and that we are finely tuned instruments. Finely tuned instruments that are tuned into the vibrations, the frequency that is being broadcast from heaven. And that we have filters up, and that's the circumcision of the heart, the cutting away of the excess flesh, to put the filters up where the things that come out of the world, that come out of the mindset of humanistic thought, the ones that come out of religious thought, or anything besides the pure message, the pure tone of heaven, all those things are filtered out because of the scar tissue where we have surrendered that flesh to him. It has been cut away. Now the receptacles are frozen, like we talked about with regard to the sweetness of on the tongue, or the bitterness of the tongue, that we now recognize that's a foreign message, and so therefore we are indeed beginning to flow with a true tongue. Now, the heart is the place where we receive the messages, and where we process the messages, where we have an emotional response and we have a will response. And as we said, your will be done. Not my will, but yours be done. Well, the problem that we have is that our will is being informed by multiple different voices. So the circumcision of the heart is designed to trim away the areas that are sensitive to the other voices, and that way to heighten the responsiveness, the receptibility to the voice of the Creator himself, and do his will. Now, the warning that he gives us at the end of Jeremiah 4:4 is that if you cannot do this, you cannot represent me. I cannot have my name being profaned by a mixed message. The message needs to be pure for the sake of humanity and the creation and the great plan that I have, and the damage that is done by an impure message from an impure messenger. Now, that doesn't mean total perfection at all times. What it means is a constant surrender of those things. When we see it, when it's revealed out, we have a short leash, some people might say, or immediate responsiveness, where immediate repentance, immediate turning, and say, I reckon that was not an unmixed message. I mixed that message with my own flesh. I mixed that conversation. I mixed that interaction, that relationship that I had. I'm mixing my own desires, my own flesh, and my own polluted desires with your plan. Father, forgive me. Father, cleanse me. Father, purify me. And that's the process of keeping this circumcision clean. If you know the process of a baby getting circumcised on the 8th day, well, just circumcising is not the big message. That's done, and it has to be done. And then you got to keep that part clean, because that's where damage can come in. That's where you have issues. So there's a process of cleansing and purifying the cutaway flesh. And that's really what the Holy One wants us to learn how to do as we circumcise our hearts, or as he does in that process.
So as we close today, I want to pray for you, and I want to pray according to the revelation streams. And I want to ask, because we understand that these streams, these scalpels, these laser beams, these are what Abba will be using to bring about this circumcision in your life. And so I want to begin to pray for all of you that will watch us. And I'm going to ask you to do something that some of you are already doing, and we thank you for it. Share this message, share this post, because this is the way you spread this message. But we pray that Abba, through his creation, through his revealed word, through the Torah, through his prophetic words, and through life experiences, that he would use these and begin this circumcision, or continue this circumcision in your life. And we pray that you'll take courage and you'll surrender to Abba's scalpels. Hey, listen, don't forget to pray for our country and those who are affected by the decisions we make in this country. Until next time, Shabbat Shalom.